Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another science fiction and fantasy wrap-up. And before we get into the books, I have a weird disclosure, for lack of a better word, and it's just this weird space that I'm in right now, and that's the fact that over the past few weeks I've been putting out my best of the year content, particularly focusing on my backlist titles. However, as I'm doing that, I'm still reading. And so it's a question, what do you read when you've already decided what are your best books of the year? And so I have this problem where I didn't want to read anything that was going to be like a new favorite because I was afraid that I would read this like amazing science fiction book and then I would be putting on my list and I would look back and go, oh, I wish I had included this book. And of course, rational Rachel tells me in my mind that, you know, if I really love a book and I've already filmed that video, I could technically just put it in next year's video and all would be okay. Probably no one watches my channel that closely to pay attention to if I read a book in December or January 1st and all of that. But basically, I went into this weird space where I didn't want to read any books that were going to be favorites. And so it's not exactly that I went out of my way to read bad books, but I went out of my way to read books that I thought were going to be just okay. Have you ever had that experience when you pick up a book and you know it's not going to be a 5-star read, but you read it anyway? That's a lot of what's in this video here. But I do think there's some good recommendations. I did enjoy some of the titles. Some of them I have interesting, hopefully, opinions on. So if you're interested in sticking around, let's get started. First, let's talk science fiction, and I read Trading in Danger by Elizabeth Moon, and this is the story of a woman who is discharged from her military career, and so she is forced to go home and help out with the family trading business, and of course things go from there. While I really love a lot of Elizabeth Moon's other books, I read some of them last year and they might have ended up on my favorites list, I had a feeling that this one would be really fun, but not necessarily a 5-star amazing read, and that's exactly how I felt about it. I thought the main character was fun. I love that she writes a lot of like female characters at the center of the story, but it was just a little bit too lighthearted for me to get like really into the story. The stakes just weren't high enough. I do believe it's the first book in an ongoing series, or at least there's several books after this, and I'm not sure if I'm going to continue on. I think there's kind of a spin-off series that's later in the world, so let me know your opinions. Does it get better from here, or is it kind of more of the same? This one, I'm just lukewarm. It was a fun read, but honestly a little bit forgettable, so moving right along. Next, we have The Ice Lion by Kathleen O'Neill Gear, and this is a story that takes place in a future but in a regressed society. So while it is technically set in the far-flung future, it actually reads much more like you're reading a story involving early humans, so during the Ice Age, hence the title. And I'm someone who loves stories involving regressed societies, so I've been anxious to pick this one up, but for reasons I kind of knew it wasn't going to be a favorite because I've actually started and stopped this book several times because I just couldn't get into it. So I kind of knew it wasn't going to be a 5-star read, but again, I love Regress Society, so I had to check it out. And my complaint with it the first time I tried to read it is still the same now that I've finished it, and that's the fact that this book has like no character development. It does have a plot, but it feels paper thin because this book is all non-stop action, to the point that this book just needs to take a breath and actually let me as the reader spend a moment with the characters, figure out what's going on. Instead, it's just like go, 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 go. It's a very fast read because again, it's all action, but it's so condensed that I almost couldn't follow it. It was so action-packed without a underlying plot, without me caring for the characters and all the things, you know, those underlying things that makes books really good. So needless to say, I was really disappointed by this one. I think I gave it like 2 or 2.5 stars. I wouldn't recommend it if you love regress societies as much as I do. This is one that unfortunately just isn't worth your time. I would love to hear down below what is one of your favorite books about a regress society. If I haven't read it, I will definitely check it out. Next, let's talk about my reread of Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, and my first time reading The Lost World. So first off, I've read Jurassic Park before, but I was due for a reread. I'll keep this brief just because I feel like I talk about this book in other videos on my channel, but of course this is the classic story that inspired the film. I really love the film, but I think I actually like the book better. It's just a little bit more serious, it's a little more gruesome, and I feel like the setup of this one is very well done. So you have the beginning of the story, which reads a bit like a mystery, even though of course chances are you know where the story is going, but you have these mysterious reptile attacks that are happening in Costa Rica. They're grisly and dark, and eventually people start to figure out that, well, perhaps these aren't actually lizards or reptiles, but perhaps something prehistoric. And then you have Malcolm coming in, the amazing character of Malcolm. For me, I could just listen to him all day, just talk about science and his philosophy, and I just could sit and listen listen to them all day. I really think that that is the strength of this book. It also has, of course, a good pacing, good action. Again, it's very gruesome. For me, this book definitely has elements of horror. It's more classified as like sci-fi thriller, but the horror is there. You definitely can't miss it if you do check it out. It's got some gory scenes that some people will not love, especially if you're sensitive to harm to small children, let's say. But overall, really enjoyed my reread. Solid 4 or 5-ish star read depending on my mood, but this book is definitely near perfect and I loved it a lot. So I was really excited. This is kind of a preview for my next book haul, but I saw this book in my local used bookstore for $5 and I had some store credit, so I did pick it up. I love that it actually matches my cover for the first one. And in the second book, of course, you follow what happens afterwards. And everyone said that Jurassic Park was amazing and the second book was not as good, but I couldn't help it. I had to check it out for myself. And unfortunately, I kind of agree with everyone. There's still elements of this that I like. The best part by far is Malcolm when he shows up and starts, again, having like soliloquies or monologues to the reader about evolution and extinction. Love those parts, so good. But I gotta admit, this book took a long time to get started and the plot was kind of thin. It was just a weaker book. It's not as good as the first. I've heard that before, but I suspect even with my mediocre review, if you haven't yet, I suspect a lot of you are still gonna go and check this out for yourself. You just kind of have to try it. So a little bit overwhelmed. I'm still gonna keep my copy because it's so nice, and it wasn't a bad book. Like, it was like a 3.5 star read depending on my mood when I go to actually review it on Goodreads, which will be after this video. But yeah, enjoyed this one. Would recommend it. Just mildly recommend, you know what I mean. Now, before you all click off in this video and give up on me because I'm not giving you good recommendations, next up I want to talk about The Honor of the Queen by David Weber. This is the second book in an ongoing series that all involves Honor Harrington, who is a strong female military officer. In the first book, we get to meet her when she is sent off to run and work in Basilisk Station, which is basically getting sloughed off to a job that no one wants. And she also has a highly intelligent cat-like alien companion that she is bonded with. And what I like is that the second book has a great setup. You follow them as they go off to this planet, which you find out is set up with a patriarchy society. And so in the society, they don't really look kindly on women, specifically women having roles of power or authority. And so they don't really like Honor Harrington so much. And so those feminist themes are really in the forefront of this story. And I gotta say, I actually had to look up online to see if David Weber was a pseudonym or a pen name for a woman, just because I think that he writes some really fantastic female characters and talks about some really fantastic, again, female-centric themes that I don't normally see male authors exploring. So needless to say, I found this book to be so fun. The idea of them encountering this society that has these controversial or differing opinions definitely reminded me of like an episode of Star Trek Next Generation, not a specific episode, but just the idea that they're always encountering different cultures and kind of explaining how humanity has evolved to be more focus on equality and all that. So I really like this one. I'm so excited to continue on with the series. If you don't know, the series is super long running. I read the first book like a year ago and I've been meaning to get back to it, so it's long overdue and I'm definitely excited. A lot of you told me to go all the way through all of the books, so I'm planning on doing that, so expect these books to show up in some future videos. Next, switching over to fantasy, let's talk about Empire of Exiles by Erin M. Evans, and this is a book that I received for review from Orbit Books. And this is a story that follows a scribe who is sent off to recover a artifact. However, when they go to do so, they end up seeing and witnessing a murder, and so the story goes from there. This is described as a fantasy story with a locked room or closed room mystery element to it, which is something I love. I have a strong love for mysteries. I don't read as many as I used to, but I really do have a strong or a soft spot for them, and so I was very eager to check this one out. Anytime that Orbit has a new fantasy debut, I'm always excited because so often they become favorites. Unfortunately, not the case here. I just found the setup to be almost a little bit clunky. There is so much going on in terms of setting up the plot and the story that the story just kind of lost its way. It's not even a really long book if you look at this, but despite that, I just never really got attached to the characters. I didn't find the mystery itself to be that compelling. And again, it just felt like it was overly bloated, like the author was building in too much supposition in this book and didn't really get down to the meat of the story soon enough. So I feel like all of my comparisons in this video are complaining about things being too fast or too slow in terms of like narrative and plot. But this one just was a little bit messy for me, not quite what I wanted. I'm still open to checking out the later books to see what happens, because sometimes a debut just, you know, it has to get started somewhere. So I think this book has potential, but it definitely didn't live up to my expectations. And speaking of disappointing books, I also tried out Conqueror's Blood, which is the sequel book to Gunmetal Gods, which might have made a place on my backlist favorite fantasy series list. However, the sequel let me down. I love the first book and I still stand by how it was ranked and rated in the other video, but in terms of the sequel, it follows different characters and it just is very weak in terms of plot. It feels very meandering, very slow. It really lacked direction and the series just really lost steam. I don't know if I'm gonna go on past this one. I do believe there's a third book that's supposed to come out next year. And yeah, I was really underwhelmed. Honestly, I've been picking away at this book on audio for over a month and I like read a chapter and then would switch to another audiobook, which I never do. So I've been slowly picking away at this one, hoping it would pick up. And yeah, it was kind of a letdown, so I finally finished it, which is why it ended up in this wrap up here. And I also read The Last Binding by R.R. Virdi, and this is a new release of giant epic fantasy series that is told from the perspective of someone who is going to an inn to tell their great epic story. And this is a fantasy story that is clearly influenced by the modern classic, for lack of a better word, Name of the Wind. So I think your enjoyment of this one is largely going to depend on how you feel about that book. I like Name of the Wind, but it wasn't an all-time favorite. I think it was, again, like kind of 3.5-star read, maybe 4 stars if I was in a good mood that day, but it wasn't something I was in love with. But I know tons of people who are obsessed with that book and its sequel and are, you know, of course, indefinitely waiting for the third book. So if you love the idea of a story within a story, this book plays heavily into that theme. Basically, there are just chapters of the characters describing their love for stories and how stories influence life and life influences stories and all of that. So I think in terms of a story, if you love that aspect and cannot get enough of it, there's tons of that within this book. However, this book is really long. I read a lot of long books and I don't normally mind because I'm a fast reader, but this one definitely felt bloated. I just didn't love it enough for the length that it was. I don't plan on continuing on with the series. And again, it's one that, despite how long and big it was, I felt like not a lot happened and it was mostly just the characters talking about how great stories were, and there was more time framing the story than actually getting to explore the story that the character was telling, if that makes sense. So I think the like narrative framing could have been edited differently and I probably would have liked the book more. So I've seen a lot of mixed reviews on this one and unfortunately I'm in the camp of do not recommend. I thought it was too long and not that interesting. And finally, I read The Tiger's Daughter, which is an epic fantasy story inspired by various Asian cultures. And this one I wanted to check out because of my love for this particular subgenre of fantasy. Within the story, we follow 2 women who are warriors and also lovers. And the story is told basically letters written between the 2 of them, kind of their past and present. And the story revolves around their love and romance as they supposedly fight demons. But the actual action of the story is so paper thin. And instead, this book is all romance. So if you love romance, you might want to check this one out, but I almost would describe it as more of a romance story in a fantasy world rather than a fantasy story with a romance subplot. So not for me, horribly disappointed. I don't plan on continuing on with the trilogy because it's just not my thing. And I tend to really love Asian inspired fantasy, but maybe it's for the best that I did let this one go because I have heard from other Own Voices reviewers that the representation here is not good. So maybe it's a good thing that in terms of plot and characters and all of that, the book just didn't hold up, so I'm not really tempted to continue on with a series that apparently is pretty problematic. Alright, so I've made it to the end of the video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about, are there any that you're actually going to check out? And I'd love to hear from all of you. Is there ever a time that you purposely pick up a book knowing that's not going to be a 5 or even 4-star read and you read it anyway? And if you're worried about the content going downhill for the end of the year, don't worry. Honestly, I'm just going to read what I want to. And again, if I find a brand new favorite and I want to talk about it in a top 10 best of the year video, I'll just stick it in next year. You probably will forget by then and not even notice. So I'm going to go back to my normal plan of trying to find all the great books to recommend to you all. So hopefully if you stuck around to the end, I'd love to hear from you all. If you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up, share it around online, drop a comment, let me know that you're here. How about a spaceship or a dragon? And if you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of adult fantasy, horror, thrillers, true crime, and science fiction. That sounds about right. And if you want to talk to me more in the comments, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.